for coming, everyone. Once again, I have the honor of kind of going over the philosophy of things. So, as you're aware, EverQuest is Sony Online Entertainment's flagship franchise, and we're going to continue on in that fine vein, leveraging our experience in producing past MMOs by applying the formula that proved successful for EverQuest, and that's assembling core pillars of gameplay where people have never been able to participate in a product that included those particular cores. Effectively, for me as a player, EverQuest created an opportunity to play a game that I couldn't find anywhere else. Really left me with no choice back in the day as to what I was going to do with my free time. And we're pursuing that same goal by bringing you a product that is not one that you can find anywhere else within the genre, or even in this case, outside of the genre. It's all about the appeal. Landmark is intended to appeal to players who want to interact with every aspect of their game world by building, destroying, collaborating, and collecting. These features will provide new gameplay experiences for MMO players with the intent of establishing the player base, which I've talked about earlier, including more non-traditional players, which should clearly be of importance to people who are concerned with the longevity and the critical mass of the games that they participate in. We've all been in that situation. 3 years, 2 years, 5 years after we started to play a game, where one of our friends asks us what we're doing, and we tell them about the game that we're playing. The more people who are playing, the more critical mass the game develops, the more people will want to play. The easier it will be to convince your friends to come play because everyone else will be playing. So it's very important to us. Most importantly, Landmark kicks off the creation of content for EverQuest Next. You're in our world now. At one point in time, we've had different philosophies and different taglines for EverQuest. The quotes around the R are very significant here. This is a completely different way of developing games. We are creating a world together, and Landmark marks that kickoff. The things that you build are not only possible to bring over to EverQuest Next later, the things that you build may actually end up in EverQuest Next as part of the core advancement, pieces of Keynos, for instance. Very important. Building upon the completely constructible, destructible, interactive game world, Landmark is going to go to the next logical step, empowering players to create content within the game with nearly all the power of an internal developer. Through the same interactive gameplay mechanics, we're going to allow our customers to participate in the shaping of the world with us and to have fun doing it. Breaking the mold. We're going to break the mold of traditional massively multiplayer games by incorporating a missing key from our pen and paper ancestors. Those of you who have played Dungeons & Dragons, the game's been around for a very, very long time. I tease some of the designers on our team that I have character sheets that are physically older than they are. And obviously, I'm not kidding. In that game, everyone had the ability to shape the world. There were rules provided for players to be able to do that. There was the Dungeon Master. And they were able to have fun doing it. The Dungeon Master got to play the game, have a blast with the rest of his players. And we are very appreciative of what's come before. So, thus, EverQuest Next Landmark. Woo!
So,
ta-da!
I'm going to run you through the developments that have happened since we last talked at SOE Live. Was it 2001? Okay, so if you were there, we showed you some art. We continued to work on that design, and as you know, we had a reset. So I was going to walk you through what happened from that reset to now, and how we got from there to here. One of my favorite quotes is this quote from Walt Disney. I think that keep moving forward. It's been my favorite phrase to the art team, because it's very easy in a prototype to stagnate, especially if you don't have, it's this chicken or egg situation where you need the tech, you need the design, you need the art, and it all has to come up at the same time from nothing. So how do you make that happen? The first thing that, well, the first thing that we had to do was sit down and discuss our goals. So we had to brainstorm for some time and talk about what was going to make this game take the whole genre to the next level. What did we need to do? And the main thing that we were going to add that was going to affect the art side was the total constructible, destructible, and fully dynamic world with tiers of content. And then we had to wrap that into an engaging style. And our number one goal above all else was that the game be fun. And that seems very obvious, but sometimes as an art director, my main goal is that the game looks amazing, but really the driving goal of the whole thing is that it's fun and that art is service to that. So we started thinking about this constructible, destructible world, and a really, really good metaphor for that are these Lego sets. That it's a set of these modular pieces and then the special pieces, and that became really important later on. Oh, and characters. That all goes together to create a set that we started thinking of as a theme. So for example, Kinos would be a theme that you would put together the modular pieces and the special pieces. And we had this other whole element that Lego doesn't even have, which is materials that we can put on everything to make it look like an MMO. So what we started out with was, we knew we had blocks, because that is the very most modular thing that you can have. We had props, and then we had materials. So this is what we had to work with. And we felt that this was probably going to be a very geometric looking game. It was going to be very angular. And I felt that the most important thing to get buy-off and to get everybody excited about it was to embrace the geometric style that we were going to plan on, so that this would support the underlying technology. These are examples that you can see here from the artist Evelyn Earle, who was the artist that did all backgrounds for Sleeping Beauty. And I thought that was very inspirational. You can see everything is very geometric, and that's a style, and that's okay. And we're in the midst of everything, pushing everything to be very organic. I thought this would be the perfect thing, just to switch it up and say, no, we're going to go totally angular. So we started developing that a little bit, see where that would take us. It was a little rough on the concept artists, because we just didn't know what we were going to do. So we had to start to explore. Was it going to be really blocky, like Minecraft? Was it going to be really organic with all the blocks disguised, or somewhere in the middle? We also had to look at what we had to use at that point. We had all of the concept art from the previous prototype, and we had all of the assets that we built from that prototype. So we wanted to leverage that art. That was very nice art, and there was nothing at all wrong with it. So we wanted to leverage it to get us moving forward a little faster. This is an example of what we showed last time that we showed at SOE Live. This is Freeport. These are all Maya models. This is totally not voxels.
For the previous prototype.
Yeah. So, and these are some of the materials that we had so this is all the tools that we had to work with. We did not have a client. All we had was a bunch of ideas and some old assets. That's So what we did was, I at first started trying to use Maya to prototype some of this, and it was just too much. It's like trying to kill a fly with a bazooka. What I ended up using,
very fun.
That could be very effective. but a little much. So I used SketchUp that you can see here and just made a block and started snapping them together just to see what would happen. And I was trying to emulate the previous concept piece. So then we talked about the materials. It was very important that the materials look very natural and realistic on top of this blocky world. You can see here starting to try to lay in some of the previous materials on top of that SketchUp world. And then when it seemed like that was going in the right direction, we made a solid goal. The first goal that we had was to get from the SketchUp phase to a client phase in 3 months. We also did some experiments in Maya of smoothing, because smoothing, we knew this is going to be a huge, huge thing for us to get away from the blocky look. And what was that? Were we going to be able to do something natural or not, and could we emulate that? So the first thing we needed to do was think about a shape library so that we could have a smart and small library of shapes. We want it to be small for a lot of reasons, to be more efficient, but also so that when you think of building with Legos and you think about, you know, you're going through all of your Lego pieces and going through them and searching for that one piece. We did not want the players to have to experience that, because that's boring. So we wanted to have this really smart library of shapes that could be offered to you at the appropriate times as you're building. After we also had to keep talking with the concept artists about, you know, could they also had this chicken and egg problem where we wanted them to create beautiful concept art, but blocky, but we didn't really know the rules. We're making up the rules as we went. So at first, the concept artists made just completely cubic looking castles that were definitely not going to work. So what we did was build off of old concept art in SketchUp, and then give screenshots of that to the concept artist, and then they did paint over. So you can see here, this is the XR area, and we just kept going. We just kept building, kept going, kept moving forward all the time. Didn't have have a lot of what we needed, but we just kept moving forward to investigate. And even, and this I think is an interesting example, because even when we didn't have concept art, I just got on Google and started looking at screenshots from other games and started building that out. So it's just all about what can you do with the tools that you do have, not about, you know, waiting for tools. So we did meet our first goal. I'm going to step you through all of the weeks of that development. This was the first thing that we saw, and it was a little scary, but we knew that there was a lot of potential there. Just kept going, kept iterating. We discovered that the bigger that we built, the better effectively raising the resolution, because those blocks become smaller the taller that you make those structures. So verticality then became one of our art style tenets. Month 2, we started getting a little bit more built out, fleshed out, investigating more with the lighting system that we were inheriting from PlanetSide. And then was when we started really getting creative. And you can see these tents are actually all made of blocks. I know it's a little weird, but that's what you can do with the right kind of smoothing.
It was that 2 weeks where we really also realized how much fun it was going to be. And that's one of the reasons why you see such a difference between these two screenshots. Even in the previous client, by this point in time, we were having a blast and everyone was becoming involved.
So then we just started building all over the place. And we were really having a good time, working late at night, and we were getting really, really excited about what we thought the potential was here. So at that point, we realized that we had met that goal. We built, and we had a lot of fun doing it. And then we just kept building more. We built out Halas. We started working with characters to see how is a character going to fit into this blocky world, what kind of materials are going to look appropriate in this world, just trying to answer as many questions as we possibly could. So So finally the day came when we saw this, and this was when we really knew that we had something that was really special. This is Paul Milan, one of our graphics programmers, breaking apart the world. So this is actually a building that Jeff made, right?
Yep. Very good. It was fun. And Rosie didn't delete it.
I just needed to switch cheese. So I thought this was oops, sorry. I skipped over that. But it was very interesting when that wall fell away. You could see that inside the wall is dirt. There's like a real depth starting to show in the world. So after that, we got a big influx of people on the team, and we thought it would be a good idea to have people build, designers and artists that were new to the team, both designers and artists, build in the client, regardless of whether they were animators or character artists or designers. And we just started building and building and building. And I thought it was extremely interesting and also very encouraging to see that sometimes the best builders were just a producer on the team or a designer. It meant that you did not have to be an environment artist that went to college to build something that you could imagine.
It truthfully showed that you, as a layman, could be inspired by the artist who sits next to you, and that you could do amazing things. All it took was the ability to look at something that somebody had put together, and we found people after two weeks looking at what one another had done and literally creating things that were so much more amazing than the original creation, the original point of inspiration, that we ourselves were shocked.
And that's what we really hope for with Landmark, is we're hoping that you, the community, is going to inspire us as we in turn inspire you. One of the artists on the team asked if I was concerned that people in the community might build better stuff than the team. And I said, absolutely not. That is exactly our goal. We want to always be standing on the shoulders of the people that built before us. And I want to point out also that this ice house that you can see, on this side, one of the artists was actually a character concept artist, came on the team and built that right off the bat. He was a huge Minecraft fan, but he found that the smoothing on that particular material, which I believe was water. But he used it as if it was ice. And this was really, really exciting, because this is what we want. We want people to find things and do things that are totally unique and experimental and really, really let their creativity show.
I think the producer actually figured out that the little pieces of the cloth could be hung together in tents.
So now it was time for a reality check. Was the look and feel, the geometric look, was that really going to work for the IP? Was that appropriate for EverQuest? And I think in some ways, we were really attached to it, because once you build in a system like this, you start to fall in love with your own creation. And that's exactly what we're hoping for. But we thought we needed to have another goal where we took it to the next level. And you can see here that the terrains were really not where we needed to be. So the new goal was to get from the green rolling hills, was this block terrain that we had, to something very, very organic. So I'm going to turn it over to Greg Spence, and he's going to talk about how we achieved that goal.
Hi everybody, I'm Greg, also known as Rothgar on our forums. And in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have picked the Ranger, because we all know he's the first to die. But that's the character I play in EQ2. So anyway, I want to talk to you a little bit about the technical side of our voxel engine and how we make what you've seen so far in the demos. And first we wanted to talk a little bit about what's a voxel and how we use voxel behind the scenes. So for every voxel in the world, and as you saw in the demo, they're actually very, very small now. In the pictures that Rosie showed for our first prototype, voxels were quite large. And in the new engine that we're using, voxel has been broken down to about a third of that size. But for every voxel, we have to store some data for it. And some of that data is its location, the material for that voxel, and contouring information to get the smoothing. There's also some other stuff that's associated with every voxel. But as you can imagine that you have a really huge world with tiny voxels equals lots of voxels, and that gives us a really big data problem. So we have to figure out how are we going to store all the data to build these massive worlds that we want you guys to be able to play in. So the answer to that is a procedurally generated world. So the way that the system works is to basically use noise algorithms and noise textures to generate the base terrain out of these noise functions. And so we don't actually have to store that as voxel data. So that's what we start from. We have, even though it's algorithms to generate it, we have control over those by designing the actual noise textures that we use. And then that's how we can contour where we want valleys and mountains and the types of materials. And like I said, that procedurally generated terrain doesn't require any data. So we can then, after we generate the procedural data, we can augment that with our own customized voxels. So as you saw in the demo, when we were attacking the Dark Ratanga, there were a lot of stoneworks around there, and those were voxels added to the base natural terrain. But most of that natural terrain out there was still in its procedural state. So the amount of data associated with that scene wasn't as bad as if the entire area was generated from little blocks, like we started with the initial prototype. So another thing that we do, healing, no longer just for the tank anymore, we can actually heal our terrain, and what that means is we can remove the voxel data and revert it back to the procedural data, and the benefit of that is that we can reduce the data. So if you were to take something that you had built up into stone and replace it back with flat grass, you'd still be using customized voxels, which on our back end would take additional space for storage. But using healing tools that we're putting into the game, we can actually turn that back to the procedural terrain, which is very good and more optimal for us. So next we want to talk about how do we render the environment. How do we take these voxels and generate the amazing looking scene that you're seeing? And in the initial prototypes, the strategy was to actually render each of those voxels. So every voxel was drawn as a cube, and we used culling information to not draw the voxels that were behind, but it produced other types of visual issues that we had to deal with. In the new system, we actually take the voxels from the data and we use, there we go. So that was part of the problem. Like, we couldn't get as much blending and contouring with the old voxel system because we were just generating cubes. So in the new system, we're using mesh generation that takes that voxel data and generates meshes like you saw in the previous picture. And then the meshes are what you're actually being rendered on the screen. And then the meshes gives us much more capability for smoothing and blending. And that stuff just looks really cool. So as you can see here, this would be the voxels not smooth. And then, oops, double click. And then smooth, you get a very nice round sphere. And so you wouldn't even know that that was created from voxels because we're obviously not rendering blocks, we're rendering a mesh. So how do we achieve the epic vistas that you're seeing? What we have to contend with is making sure that your client can render everything that you see on the screen. And so we refer to that as level of detail, or LOD. And that basically means that the things that are closest to your camera are higher resolution textures, higher resolution in terms of the actual mesh itself. But as you get further from the camera, you would lose that resolution, you wouldn't notice it. So we use level of detail to optimize the rendering. And basically, the way the mesh generation works is, as you get further away from the camera, instead of using every little individual voxel to generate a mesh, we actually combine those into larger voxels, and we generate lower resolution meshes. And then we blend those level of detail smoothly as the distance gets away from your camera, and you should not notice the change in LOD as it goes away, and that's the goal. And that gives us the ability to render these really awesome landscapes and make sure it can perform on on everybody's machine out there. And there's an example also from the demo. And then so the last part is we want to talk a little bit about physics. And when it comes to actually destroying the terrain, this is showing in the upper right or upper left of the actual game. And then in the lower right, you can see our physics debug tool. And that shows us the actual physics particles and what they're doing when we do the destruction. So it helps us debug and work on those particle effects. It's a pretty cool tool. And now I'll hand it over to Michael.
We call this piece of art man fantasy for obvious reasons.
They gave me long hair in here, so it's kind of a dream of mine.
But they left the glasses on.
They left, yeah.
I think they look fierce.
I do look fierce, thank you. Anyway, so thus far everybody's been talking about creating a world, but that's actually not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something slightly different. We're switching gears a little bit. We're talking about destroying the world. Like that, right? That's what the air called it. Not quite like that. I'm talking about harvesting and a couple of the systems that go along with it. So this is a picture that you might recognize from the debut that they're discussing harvesting. So what does harvesting have to do with a destructible world and creating a world? In fact, it has to do a lot with it, right? We talk about how destruction changes the systems that we create. We talk about it all the time, but this is actually one instance where it does actually change quite a bit. It doesn't change absolutely everything, so you recognize quite a few things, but it just changed a lot, and so I'll talk about some of the differences. One of the first things is this. Can anybody point out a harvesting NPC? Not you. You're not allowed to. There are no harvesting NPCs. We actually got rid of them, right? Because we don't need them. Our world is actually made of resources, right? So you don't run around and look at a terrain and then see a node sticking up. Looks like a sore thumb. The world is made of resources, and that allows us to have a more organic approach to the way we build the world. Which kind of goes into our natural resource locations, right? Things are where you expect them to be, and because of the tier system that we have, we don't have to say, hey, in the level 5 zone, you're going to find copper. You find copper where you think copper might be, which is pretty cool. Here's the map you've seen of a sample continent, and on this continent, we'll do a little quiz. On this continent, where do you think you can find rocks? You guys? On the mountains, right? It's pretty cool. Underwater, sure, there are mountains underwater. You find resources, where you think they might be, and you guys obviously know this sort of information already. Just coming to the game, these things, feel natural. I like this particular slide. Dirt can be found pretty much anywhere. It was fun explaining this one to the artist when we were talking about. They're like, "You want me to highlight the whole map?" It's like, yeah. Anyway, when you harvest, it destroys the world for a temporary amount of time, and when you're harvesting dirt or whatever it is, you're going about and destroying things, and then it heals up and will move some of the resources that you've harvested. But one important thing I want to note is, even though you come into the game knowing a lot of these things and where a lot of the things are going to happen, we still have game-specific knowledge. So we still want you to explore, and this is an example of where you might find mithril, right? Mithril is found deep within the mountains, up north, and that's something that you'll have to discover as you play the game. You're not just going to come into the game.
Don't dig too deep, though.
Don't dig too deep. Yes, it's very scary. Awesome. And the next point is, our world doesn't just consist of the top layer, right? We talked about this tiered concept, and that applies to harvesting as well. You're going to be surface mining, and you're also going to be harvesting, deep beneath the earth, as Jeff, segued into. So don't forget that. Next, I want to talk to you guys about tools. So tools is something that we're going to be making interesting. It's not just, we'll have things like pickaxes, obviously, but we want to expand tools to make the actual process of harvesting more exciting, right? And we'll get into more of that later. I just want to let you guys know right now that there'll be some basic harvesting, and there'll also be some more interesting and more specialized harvesting, we'll call it. And you can extrapolate what that means. So we want to use harvesting as a method to encourage exploration, right? Because it's pretty important. So we'll go back to our mithril example. As you guys know so far, I'm fond of examples and I use them a lot. Say I'm cruising around in the snow-capped mountains and I'm harvesting mithril and lumber and stone and all the things that go there. I get enough mithril to make my first mithril pickaxe and I'm so proud of it. As I'm going through here, I noticed that there's an active volcano. Can you guys see the volcano on there? It's right there. You see this volcano and you're like, all right, that looks like a really cool area. You look at your pickaxe and it says you can harvest obsidian on it. So you're like, all right, you put 2 and 2 together and you cruise over to the volcano. And as you're there, you're harvesting obsidian for that sweet obsidian couch you want to make. You're finding treasure and you're having new experiences. And we have set up the world in such a way that these exploration moments happen fairly frequently. And harvesting is just one way that we move you towards that. So now you know quite a bit about harvesting, not quite a bit, but a decent amount about harvesting. I want to tell you about crafting, what you can do with your resources. So first off, everybody is a crafter, right? Landmark is a frontier game, and on the frontier, everybody needs skills to survive, essentially. If you want something, you can go out and get resources and you can make it, right? You want a bed, go make a bed. If you want an enchanted tiki statue or whatever, you can go out and do something like that. So everyone is a crafter, and we're going to make the system easy to use and accessible. What I worry that when I say easy to use and accessible, people are going to worry that there's nothing out there for the hardcore guy. That's not the case at all, actually. It's a deep system where we can do quite a few things, and I want you guys to know that. The next point is players will be making most of the items. We have drops and we have treasures in the world, but we want you guys to go out there and make things, right? We want you to encourage commerce and to, hey, I explored this area and found some really cool resources. I went back and I made that, made that item. Do you want that? Would you want to trade or whatever it is? And so we want you guys to go out and create most of these items. And in fact, we allow you to make quite a few items. Here's an example of some of the things some elven items, and here are some cairn things. And this is just a small example of some of the items that you might be able to make. Because the way I feel about it is, we want to provide enough things for you to find and to be able to craft, to keep kind of a record of where you've been and what you've done. I know I collect things. I go to conventions and do all that kind of stuff, and I get my action figure or whatever it is, and I set it on my shelf, where it belongs, right? And you can look at all of those things I have, and it's a record of what I've done and where I've been. We want that experience to be the case here as well. But we also realize this animation is sweet, by the way. We realize you can thank Jake for that. He's been here for a while.
It'll be at least that detailed in the game.
Yes, that's the process. But anyway, we realize there's some of you guys that might be less sentimental, and you can go out and you can harvest the items that you found and you created, because they're also made of resources, right? If I set something on the counter, bash it, it becomes the resources that it's created from.
I'll remind Michael of that when I melt down his action figures.
Jeff's not invited to my house. Anyway, I would love to share more information on crafting with you. That's what we have so far. We want to give you a brief overview, but unfortunately we will have to do that later. We'll be revealing more information over time, and Jake has more for you on things you can do with resources.
I'm Jake Sones. I'm a senior designer, working mostly on Landmark and building inside of Request Next. Terry told me I gotta go fast, so I'm gonna try and hit all the points. No? I don't have to go fast. Oh, I have 5 minutes. Oh man. All right. So Michael went over how you can harvest stuff and how you can use it for crafting. This section I'm going to talk about what you can do with building. So outside of your plot, you're mostly going to be building for navigation purposes. Since our world is so destructible, you're going to get trapped unless you can build your way out of the holes that you're digging. So that world will regenerate and it will get back to its natural state, so it's not just going to be a huge crater and wasteland. But while you're building outside of the plot, you're not going to be using like all the same tools that you're building to make your house. There'll be a very limited tool set. You won't be you won't be smoothing like terrain in the outdoor world, so there's not really a reason to do that. But once you're building in your plot, this is where you're going to do all the permanent building. This is where you're going to make your house to store all your action figures. This is where you invite your friends over so everybody can do this together in a big social way. And this is where you're going to get the really powerful tools. This is where you're going to be using the same tools that we use. Everything that we use, you guys will also have access to. We had a lot of different philosophies when creating those tools. Most important among them is easy to use. We wanted to make it really clear that what's going to happen as soon as you click that confirmation button. We want to give you lots of really good feedback and lots of previews of what's going to happen. And we want that behavior to be consistent across different tools. We want those buttons to feel natural. So in this example, you're placing a block that can be rotated in many different ways. We're, the button bound to that is the mouse wheel. You just use the mouse wheel and it rotates. We want that to be consistent, not just across placing blocks, but placing props, and when you're pasting in large things into the area. And we build on top of that. We group related functions together. So there might be, like, if you hold shift, your mouse wheel changes from rotation to doing like an offset in a specific axis. And I'm really looking forward to showing you guys how this stuff looks eventually. But unfortunately, right now, we're not quite ready to show how it looks in game. We also wanted to make sure that everything was really powerful. We didn't want you to have to build brick by brick by brick, because that would get really boring and take a really long time to do. So we looked at a lot of different games and a lot of different mods for different games to see what types of features people ended up using. And we wanted to take those things into consideration and take into consideration the powerfulness that we get from smoothing, which is something that I haven't really seen in another voxel-based game. And we want to give you really powerful things like copy and paste, so you can build quickly and get everything moving along, so you're not stuck in tedious things. But almost as important as those other two is we want this to be fun to use. It's not an art program, it's a game. And we want it to feel that way. We want all of the tools that you're using to be in the same art style as the rest of the world. We don't want like big Maya handles or like wireframes around everything. We want it to feel like it takes place in the world that you're editing. So things don't just like appear in the world, you don't just click and they just pop in there. We introduce them with animations and sounds and particle effects. While you move things around, they'll stick to your cursor and sway back and forth. Like when you click to place it, it'll thump down and have like particle effects, like dust clouds come out of it. It'll feel like it's solid, like you're actually moving part of the world. But with that, we come to some debate, right? Because the more flashy you make something, you lose sight of what it is that you're actually doing. So we're definitely taking that into consideration. Oh man, I just totally messed it up. As well as with the animation, like too much of it, you're just sitting there waiting for something to happen, and we don't want to slow you down with that either. Another big debate is ease of use versus powerfulness of tools. When you have a few features, it's really easy to pick up and understand what's going on. You can look at something like a knife and you're like, okay, I'm going to stick the pointy end of the bad guy, and that's all it does. It does that really well. And when we start giving you more features, you're getting more power, but then you start to add levels of complication that can lead to confusion. Like, I don't really remember where the saw is, but I don't want to try to figure out how to get there. And we don't want to overburden you with too much of this stuff. So balancing these two and finding a happy medium requires a lot of innovation. Coming up with something weird and crazy. And that's really what we're trying to do with EverQuest Next and Landmark is find new and innovative ways to combine things to give you tools that you haven't seen before but make sense. Just like a gunplay, totally makes sense. And that's what we're hoping to do. So, thanks.
Not yet? All right, there we go. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. There's a lot we talked about here. If you have questions, go ahead and form a line here, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. Just so everybody knows, we do have a full Q&A hour after this. We'll take about a 5-minute break, and so if we don't get to you this time, come back and we'll answer your questions then.
So inventory space, I'm just wondering if we're going to have decent sized stacks or if we're going to be making tons of little trips to some big box that we're dropping things in, or how we're going to organize things.
I think you can expect to have decent size inventory. I mean, it's going to be important to have your own claim, to have a place you can go back and store your stuff. But we don't necessarily envision you. As fun as it is to move through the world, it's not necessarily fun to go back and forth over the same spot over and over and over and over and over again.
Fun question. I'm from Nagafin. So I see that gravity actually seems to do something in this game. Can I dig under somebody's plot and collapse their plot?
It's not very nice.
Can you repeat a little bit? I didn't get just the end.
Well, I can answer this with Greg, it's okay. The answer is we want to make the game as interesting and intuitive as possible, but there will be some limitations. So when I was the technical director talking about some of these things, I said no to that question. Steve may have a different answer. We just don't know right now, or at least Steve's not willing to tell me what the answer is.
To Terry's credit, it was one of the very few things that he said no about.
So I button dinner first.
Hey, thanks guys. Along the line of gravity, as far as the Forge Light engine, can we expect the system recs to be similar to PlanetSide 2? And would having like an SLI setup and or like multi-threaded processor be advantageous? That's a lot of support that's lacking in online games, is multi-threaded.
Well, it's definitely something. I mean, we're obviously trying to optimize the engine as much as possible to take use of all those technologies out there. It's a little too early for us to really start talking about min specs yet. Optimization is something that is ongoing, but it's something that we have to continue to focus on so that we can get it running as fast as possible on all machines. But yeah, we're looking at every opportunity. We're working closely with the NVIDIA guys, and we're doing everything we can to make this thing run fast for everybody. So yeah, we're going to try to take advantage of all the technologies possible.
We want a beautiful game that has as great a longevity as humanly possible, but ultimately, we talked earlier about critical mass and accessibility. We can't have a living, vibrant, breathing, massively multiplayer game that everyone can play in unless everyone can play in it, or as many people as humanly possible.
So you're talking about the ability to harvest resources in the world. I'm just having difficulty wrapping my head around the notion of setting 20 people loose in Antarctica, for example, and not having it look like the surface of the moon in about 20 to 30 minutes. Can you help paint a picture in my head? What would happen then? How does the world look after you set those 20 people loose? What's happening in the world? What's happening with the voxels? What's happening with the terrain? That kind of stuff.
I think that when the world starts to heal itself, we want to support that to make it feel as natural as possible. So you could envision particle effects to support that. Maybe the land is filling in. There's audio to support that.
So the world heals itself already. We currently set the time limit at 5 minutes. But I think we have a pretty clear path for how the world will regenerate itself after people go through it. We'll be talking about it a lot more in the future, but I think you'll be entirely satisfied with our approach. The world won't end up looking like Swiss cheese in the long term. I realize I'm just saying that, but we'll prove it to you in the months to come.
So the players are most willing to submit to self-healing things like an open world PvP server. Would it be possible to mine rare resources from player-made objects? Whether that be somebody gets ambushed, you take their wonderfully made sword and smash it to bits and take the resources, or better yet, you find their nice looking house and you smash it to bits and you start taking pieces of their walls and their whatever they've made and make it your own.
That is a spectacular question. We aren't talking about PvP, but for example, that's the sort of thing that I would expect a designer to be talking about. Because as you start looking into the mechanics of the world that we've talked about, That is one of the very first things that somebody who's interested in PvP starts to bring up. Like, can I go blow up that guy's castle? And when I blow up his obsidian couch, do I get to run away with the obsidian?
Okay, and to answer that in a slightly different way, we're going to have an extremely robust permission system. So you will have the ability to control in Landmark what other people can do with your things. So if you don't want anybody to be able to come in and manipulate it, you can choose to do that. If you want people to be able to do it, you can turn the permissions on so that anybody can come along and blow it up. You know, and so that way you can, there's the ability to create the experiences that you want to the world.
I was wondering while harvesting, is there going to be any risks or death or anything along those lines?
So we're not really talking about the death stuff right now, but there's certainly risks. So when we talk about harvesting obsidian, there's lava, and lava is dangerous. There are certainly areas you can get into, and even itemization options that allow you to circumvent some of those dangers as well. So it's when we begin to discuss it more, you'll see what I'm talking about. But there's definitely risk.
Yep. Expect to hear a lot more on that subject.
Yep.
It seems like in terms of creating art assets, you just completely reinvented the wheel in terms of how you would have created an MMO or created art assets for an MMOs from say 5 years ago. Do you find that it now with the easier tools are you able to have basically more throughput, like 10 artists can create more content in a given amount of time that they would have been able to do 5 years ago with the previous versions of your tools?
That is absolutely our goal, and we are starting to reap some of the rewards of that. We also have tech artists on the team that their whole job is just to figure that stuff out, so that the artists can dedicate themselves to being creative more than trying to refit armor sets and all of the more tedious tasks.
A big part of my day is going and talking to the artists and being like, what's frustrating you, what's easy, like how can we make this better? And that's definitely our goal, is to make everything as smooth and as quick as possible.
What's the best way for me to satisfy my need to grief other players?
It's a personal question.
Well, it's interesting that one of the things, I'm not going to be able to answer your question because I don't know in particular which way you want to grief players. But it's funny because this world opens up entirely new ways and new problems and new things that we need to solve to give players either a way to or a way to protect against griefing. So I think that we will be surprised by the ways in which players decide to grief other people, and you guys will be surprised by some of the things that we've thought of ahead of time and we've built in systems to facilitate or limit.
And I think we've got a pretty good plan for harnessing the joy of griefing. You'll enjoy it. The answer to your question is, what you should do is you should listen closely to announcements to come over the course of the next couple of months, because I think you'll get a big kick out of some of them.
So you mentioned creating objects, like with crafting, and placing them in your home or whatever you're constructing. Like in EQ2, you can scale an object up and down. Do you have to have more resources to be able to scale? Can you scale an object up and down?
Yes, you can right now.
Is it possible resources?
If you were building something that was larger, in all likelihood it would cost more resources.
So there's actually two different systems at play here. One is building with voxels and one is placing props. So we do allow some scaling of voxels, and that does cost different resources because each voxel costs a resource. As far as props, we do have scaling in right now, and the creation of that prop requires a set amount. Cool.
I understand this might be difficult to answer due to the different layers of the game, but how big can we expect EverQuest next to be?
Biggest. Very large. Do we have a technical answer? There are limits.
We haven't defined the limits yet. We haven't reached the limits of what we're able to do. We've been able to create the things that we want to inside of the system, and there are technical limits. We just haven't reached them yet.
Yeah, we're building the system to scale with more hardware. You know, more hardware, more processes should scale the world larger and larger. We're not to the point where we're testing yet to see how big we can get, but that is definitely something we're keeping in mind. We want to be able to open new contents and hopefully be able to just scale it through more hardware and more processes.
And
One other
again,
thing-
more export, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. One other thing to consider though, every game world that you've ever played in the past has generally been laid out flat on this. Every one of our game worlds is actually a volume of some sort or another. So while you've got the surface to play on, you also have the volume underneath or the volume above or the volume underneath and above, right? So that'll effectively change the face of adventuring and exploring in fairly significant ways, where it's no longer about the square footage of Antonica.
So I assume that each of these voxels has like a material assigned to it. Does that material have, say, mass or like hardiness? So like if you have a wall, it's more difficult than to blow up than say a wall of dirt. And in the mass respect, if you blow up that wall of stone, does it have more of a effect when it say hits the ground, like visually and audible? What's the word? Orally, okay, I don't know. It sounds like it's a talking wall. But say you blow up the brick wall, and it just sounds heavier when the particles hit the ground compared to say the dirt wall.
Well, it's absolutely our plan to have materials have properties that have audio attached to them.
And different physical strengths. So in Michael's example earlier, he talks about a mithril pick. The reason why a mithril pick is significant to Terry, who's adventuring in the world, is that literally opens up more world to Terry. He can dig deeper. Why? Because the granite that he had previously discovered, he couldn't actually beat through it with his iron pick. It says right on the mithril pick that it can mine a certain type of stone. He now realizes that his horizons have expanded. It's not just an issue of walking necessarily to the next zone or continent. He can dig deeper now.
In addition to that, the mithril pick scales with other things as well. So it'll make it easier for you to harvest lower tier things.
My question kind of comes sort of to what Jeff was just talking about. You said walking to the next content. Will we be able to craft or create props that will allow us sort of faster movement travel, maybe the ability to fly over the terrain and scout it out, or get yourself a mount or something like that for fast movement?
It sounds like fun, but it's too early to say.
All right, and so that's actually amazing. We went about a minute over, but we got through all of the questions we had for this.